Bear Bryant, the wildly successful football coach of Alabama, attributed his success to simply having a plan. Most people, he said, don't, and that's why he could beat them. Well, what's true in football is doubly true with your money. You need a plan, which is why it's great to welcome Larry Swedroe, the learned MoneyWatch columnist and the author of the only guide you'll ever need for the right financial plan. Thanks for being here, Larry.
Great to be back, Eric.
All right. Now, at this moment in time, the big fear on everyone's mind is deflation. But only a few months ago, everyone was worried about inflation. There are smart people on either side of the question. Which are you worried about?
Well, I think the right answer is, first, people need to understand is that no matter how much we'd like to believe otherwise, there's no one who can tell us what's going to happen in markets, whether it's interest rates, stocks, bonds, whatever.
Or inflation, deflation.
Right, or inflation and deflation. And a great example of that is just a year ago, the Wall Street Journal asked 50 economists what their forecast of the 10-year Treasury was going to be. Out of the 50, just 7 got the direction right.
Now, let me get this right. Out of 50 economists surveyed, only 7 even got the direction right.
And so, if that doesn't tell you that you can't forecast, I don't know what would, all right? So the right way to think about the problem is to figure out which is the bigger risk to you and build your portfolio around that or design it. So, for example, if you look at a retiree, their bigger risk clearly is inflation, so they should have probably avoid longer-term nominal bonds.
Because they're the ones that are most sensitive to interest rate moves.
That's exactly
inflation
right.
will drive interest rates up.
Right. Now, they might buy longer-term TIPS because that would protect them, but they certainly shouldn't be buying longer-term nominal bonds.
TIPS being inflation-protected. Securities.
Right. And they do well whether you have inflation or deflation. So that's my favorite investment. On the other side of the coin, you might have a young man who's got a good, stable job. His bigger risk clearly is deflation because his wages are likely to keep up with inflation. And if you have deflation, okay, he likely could lose his job, or at least the risk of that happening as the economy goes bad. So he should own longer-term bonds to protect him against that risk. So that's really what my new book does, is it addresses all these issues to help people figure out what are the bigger risks for them and help them decide whether they should own more or less stocks and bonds than the average person, more or less small caps, emerging markets, or whatever the instrument we're talking about is.
All right, good. And longer-term or shorter-term bonds, which would lower or increase your exposure to inflation.
That's right.
You talk a lot. In fact, the very first chapter of your book is just about this topic, which is uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Things have changed an awful lot in just the past few years. How do you know that what worked in the past should guide you in the future?
Well, in fact, I very clearly say you don't know what worked in the past will, because there must be risk. While stocks have outperformed bonds, that doesn't mean they will in the future. Just ask any Japanese investor about that, right? So there has to be the risk, but you can't base your investment strategy on the worst case scenario, like the U.S. will be the next Japan. What you base it on expectations, and it must be so that stocks have higher expected returns than bonds because they're riskier and people wouldn't invest in them. So now you have to decide how much risk is appropriate for you, and the book gives examples discussing issues like your ability to take risk. The more stable your job is, the more equity risk you can take. The longer your investment horizon, the more equity risk you can take because you can wait out a bear market. It deals with your willingness to take risk, how much stomach acid you can absorb, still sleep well and not panic. And most importantly, the need to take risk.
So the answer to that question is very much the same as your answer to the inflation-deflation question. It's really, where are you exposed and what is right for you personally?
Yeah, and the way to think about it is this. You may expect stocks to have, say, a 7% return, but you have to think about it not as a point estimate. You're not going to get 7. We know what you might think of it as a potential dispersion of returns, like a bell curve, where there's maybe a 40% chance you'll have more than 8, a 30% chance more than 9, but there's also a 20% chance you'll have less than 3, and a 10% chance it'll be -1. And you have to build your plan about, what will I do if that left tail risk shows up like it did for Japanese, and I talk about that in the section called Plan B, sort of contingency plan. If I take these risks on equity to try to capture those returns that are expected, but the risk shows up, can I live with less spending? Can I move to a lower cost living area? Can I sell a second home, whatever it might be? But if you don't have options like that, then you need to lower your risk taking in the first place. So that's what I mean by addressing these risks, tailoring it to your own situation.
All right, great. All right, Larry, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And thanks for watching.